Every family has a story they tell about themselves, a story where everyone has a role, everyone has a place, and everything makes sense. But in some families, that story only works if one person agrees to carry the blame for everything that goes wrong. If you were that person, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. You were the difficult one, the too sensitive one, the one who always seemed to cause problems just by existing in a room. And for years, maybe decades, you believed that story. You believed something was fundamentally wrong with you. But here's what the research actually shows. The psychology behind scapegoating reveals something that most families will never admit. The person they tried hardest to break is, more often than not, the one who ends up the most psychologically whole. And there are 5 specific mechanisms that explain exactly why. To understand why the scapegoat becomes the strongest, you first have to understand what scapegoating actually is. Because it's not just being blamed a lot. It's not sibling rivalry that got out of hand. It's a system. In family systems psychology, pioneered by Bowen in the 1960s, every family operates as an emotional unit. When anxiety rises in that unit, when a marriage is failing, when addiction is present, when generational trauma is festering beneath the surface, the system needs somewhere to put that tension. It needs a release valve. That's where triangulation comes in. When the tension between 2 members becomes unbearable, a third person gets pulled in to absorb the pressure. And in dysfunctional families, one specific person gets permanently assigned that role. They become what clinicians now call the identified patient. The one the family collectively agrees is the problem. Rebecca Mandeville, who was the first clinician to formally name this pattern as family scapegoating abuse, describes it as a systemic form of psycho-emotional abuse where one family member becomes the container for the family's collective shame, anxiety, and unresolved trauma. It serves a very specific function. It protects everyone else from having to confront what's actually wrong. And here's the part that changes everything once you understand it. The scapegoat is not chosen randomly. Research consistently shows that the child selected for this role tends to be the most emotionally perceptive member of the family, the one who sees too clearly, the one who feels too deeply, the one who, even as a child, refused to participate in the performance everyone else agreed to maintain. You weren't chosen because something was wrong with you. You were chosen because something was right with you that the family couldn't tolerate. Now here's where it gets counterintuitive, and this is backed by clinical research that rarely makes it into mainstream conversation. In narcissistic family structures, there's typically a golden child and a scapegoat. Everyone assumes the golden child got the better deal. They were praised, protected, favored. The scapegoat was rejected, blamed, and pushed to the margins. But the long-term psychological outcomes tell a completely different story. Therapists and researchers working with adult survivors consistently report that golden children are often more severely damaged in the long run. And the reason is enmeshment. The golden child was rewarded for one thing only: compliance. They learned that love is conditional on performance. Their identity was built entirely around meeting someone else's needs. And by adulthood, many of them describe feeling hollow, disconnected from any authentic sense of who they are. Some never develop one. The scapegoat, forced to the outside, received something the golden child never did: distance. And in that distance, unwanted as it was, their identity remained intact. They couldn't be enmeshed because they were rejected, and rejection, brutal as it felt, preserved the one thing enmeshment destroys: their identity. The conditions designed to destroy the scapegoat ended up forging capacities the rest of the family never developed. And psychology can now name what those capacities are. There are 5 specific mechanisms at work. In Bowen's theory, there's a concept called differentiation of self. It means the ability to maintain your own identity, your own thoughts, your own emotional center, while still remaining connected to other people. It's essentially the measure of psychological maturity. Under normal circumstances, this develops gradually. Through healthy relationships, through therapy, through decades of trial and error. It's slow work. Scapegoats don't get that luxury. When your family rejects you, when the system tells you that you are the problem, you are left with exactly 2 options. You can collapse into their narrative and believe you really are broken. Or you can build something separate, an identity that doesn't depend on their approval, a sense of self that exists independent of their story about you. The ones who survive this process intact achieve a level of differentiation that takes most people decades of intentional work to reach. Reid, a therapist specializing in narcissistic family dynamics, puts it plainly. The scapegoat develops greater psychological flexibility precisely because rigid defenses were never available to them. The golden child could afford denial. The scapegoat could not. You didn't have the luxury of pretending everything was fine. And that forced clarity, uncomfortable as it was, became the bedrock of an identity no one can take from you, because you built it yourself, without anyone's help or permission. But differentiation alone doesn't explain the full picture. The second mechanism is something researchers didn't initially expect to find. Let's talk about an experience you probably know intimately, but have never been given proper language for. Hypervigilance, the constant scanning, reading micro-expressions before the other person finishes their sentence, knowing someone's mood the moment they walk through a door, feeling the temperature of a room shift before anyone else registers it. In the family system, this was survival. You had to know when the narcissistic parent was about to erupt. You had to read the signals, anticipate the mood shifts, adjust your behavior in real time just to stay safe. It wasn't a choice, it was necessity. And clinically, hypervigilance is categorized as a trauma response, which it is. In the context of danger, it's your nervous system working overtime to protect you. But here's what happens when that same neural wiring gets removed from the threatening environment. It doesn't disappear, it repurposes. Research published in PsychCentral on scapegoated children shows they develop a heightened ability to manage their own emotions and read others with unusual accuracy. They decipher what people actually need, not what people say they need. They respond intuitively to emotional undercurrents that go unnoticed by nearly everyone else in the room. This isn't being too sensitive. That's the label your family gave it to dismiss what they couldn't match. What it actually is, once you've done the work to regulate the anxiety around it, is a trained perceptual system operating at a higher resolution than average. That thing where you notice what everyone else misses in a conversation, where you pick up on tension before anyone acknowledges it, where you know someone is lying before they finish the sentence. That's not a flaw. It's a skill that was forged under pressure. And in safe environments, it makes you extraordinarily good at connection, at leadership, at any work that requires understanding human beings. And this connects directly to the third mechanism, which might be the most uncomfortable one to hear. The golden child internalizes a very specific lesson about reality. They learn that truth is negotiable. That reality is whatever keeps the narcissist happy. That if you say the right things, perform the right way, reality can be whatever you need it to be. The scapegoat learns the opposite. you learned that reality exists whether anyone acknowledges it or not. Because the family's version of reality was being weaponized against you daily. They said you were the problem. You knew you weren't. They said everything was fine. You could feel that it wasn't. They said you were crazy for seeing what you saw, but you saw it anyway. Reid identifies this clinically as a stronger commitment to truth, not because scapegoats are morally superior, but because their survival literally depended on accurate perception. You could not afford the luxury of comfortable illusions when those same illusions were being used to justify your abuse. And this creates adults who have a very specific quality. They are deeply uncomfortable with dishonesty, with manipulation, with performance and pretense in ways that other people can tolerate, which makes certain relationships harder. People who prefer comfortable lies find you unsettling. But it also means you build your life on solid ground. Your decisions are based on what's actually true, not on what you wish were true. And when everyone around you is operating on wishful thinking and you're operating on reality, the long-term outcomes are not close. Viktor Frankl, who studied meaning and survival under the most extreme human conditions, identified this same principle. The ability to face reality clearly, even when it hurts, is the prerequisite for all genuine meaning-making. You cannot transform suffering you refuse to acknowledge exists. If you're recognizing yourself in what I'm describing, and you want to keep exploring this kind of psychology, consider subscribing. I put out content like this every week, and the next two mechanisms might be the most important ones for where you are right now. But seeing clearly isn't enough on its own. The fourth mechanism is what turns perception into action. When the family system refuses to support you, when your emotional needs are not just unmet but actively punished for existing, you have to learn something that children should never have to learn on their own. You have to learn to be your own ground. This isn't a choice. This is what happens when the environment demands it. You learn emotional self-regulation without anyone helping you regulate. You learn to validate your own experiences when no one else will confirm what you're feeling is real. You learn to make decisions, sometimes massive ones, without the safety net of family approval or guidance. And developmentally, this forces the scapegoat to build internal resources that people from consistently supportive families simply never needed to develop. The demand was never placed on them. Now, there's a distinction that matters here, and I want to be honest about it. Because there's a version of self-reliance that isn't healthy. There's counterfeit independence. The I don't need anyone stance that's actually avoidance wearing a mask. That's not strength. That's a wall built to prevent further injury. Genuine autonomy looks different. It's the ability to meet your own needs and remain open to connection with others. It's knowing you can survive alone while choosing not to live that way. And the scapegoat who does the deeper recovery work, who processes the trauma rather than just surviving it, moves from that defensive independence into something integrated, something that's actually rare. You learn to be your own parent before you even knew what that phrase meant. And while that wasn't fair, and it shouldn't have been required of you, it gave you a relationship with yourself that doesn't depend on external validation to function. That's not a small thing. Entire industries exist because adults are trying to build from scratch what you were forced to develop in childhood. And all four of these mechanisms feed into the fifth one, the one that separates people who are broken by adversity from people who are fundamentally transformed by it. In 1996, psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun formally identified something that survivors of trauma had been describing for centuries, but that psychology hadn't yet named. They called it post-traumatic growth. And it's different from resilience. Resilience means bouncing back, returning to where you were before the trauma. Post-traumatic growth means growing beyond your previous level of functioning, becoming something you could not have become without the adversity. Not because suffering is good, but because of what the struggle to survive it can build. Tedeschi and Calhoun identified 5 specific domains where this growth occurs. And every single one maps directly onto the scapegoat's recovery trajectory. The first is deeper relationships with others. Because when you know what real disconnection costs, when you've lived inside the loneliness of being unseen by the people who are supposed to love you most, you bring a depth to your chosen relationships that surface-level people will never understand. The second is recognition of personal strength. Not the arrogant kind, the quiet kind, the "I survived something that should have destroyed me and I'm still here" kind. That knowing lives in your body, whether you acknowledge it out loud or not. The third is new possibilities, because being expelled from the family system, as agonizing as it was, opened doors you would never have found inside it. When you stop trying to earn belonging from people who were never going to give it, you suddenly have energy for paths you couldn't see before. The fourth is a deeper appreciation of life, because you know what it feels like to have your very existence treated as a burden. So when someone genuinely welcomes your presence, when a moment of peace arrives, you feel it at a depth that people who've never been starved for, it simply cannot access. And the fifth is spiritual or existential growth, because you had to find meaning in suffering or be consumed by it. There was no middle ground. Now, here's the piece that most content about this topic gets wrong, and I want to be careful with it. Post-traumatic growth coexists with pain. You don't have to be healed to be growing. You don't have to be over it for the transformation to be real. The growth and the grief live side by side. They're not mutually exclusive. Anyone who tells you that you need to be finished hurting before your strength is valid is asking you to perform recovery the same way your family asked you to perform normalcy. The research is clear on what determines who experiences PTG versus who remains stuck in the aftermath. It comes down to one distinction: deliberate rumination versus intrusive rumination. Intrusive rumination is being haunted, the memories that chase you, the loops you can't escape. Deliberate rumination is choosing to reflect, choosing to make meaning, choosing to ask, what did this build in me, rather than only, why did this happen to me? Viktor Frankl said it as clearly as anyone ever has. Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, only by lack of purpose. The scapegoat who assigns meaning to their suffering, who refuses to let it remain senseless cruelty, transforms it from destruction into raw material. The suffering wasn't justified. It never will be. But they refuse to let it be the final word. So let's bring this back to where you are, right now, today. If you recognize yourself in any of what I've described, I want you to hear this clearly. The role was never about what was wrong with you. It was always about what the family couldn't tolerate. They couldn't tolerate someone who saw clearly. They couldn't tolerate someone who felt deeply. They couldn't tolerate someone who, even as a child, wouldn't fully participate in the lie everyone else agreed to maintain. The strength you carry now was not built despite the scapegoating. It was built through it. The suffering wasn't good. You shouldn't feel grateful. But the specific conditions you endured, the forced outsider position, the constant blame, the refusal of support, those conditions demanded adaptation. And the adaptations you made happen to be the exact traits that psychology identifies as markers of genuine psychological maturity: differentiation, emotional intelligence, truth, orientation, self-reliance, and the capacity for post-traumatic growth. Those aren't things people develop casually. Those are things people develop under pressure. And you were under pressure your entire childhood. You are not strong in spite of your family. You are strong because you had to become your own anchor when no one else would be. And that is not something to grieve. That is something to recognize. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you the trauma was worth it. It wasn't. I'm not going to tell you to be grateful. You don't owe gratitude to people who harmed you. What I'm going to tell you is that the investment you made in surviving, all those years of holding yourself together with no support, was not wasted. It produced a version of you that no one in your family can replicate. And that version is yours now. The ongoing work looks like this. Boundaries with the people who still see you through the old lens. Nervous system regulation, so that the hypervigilance serves you instead of exhausting you. Choosing relationships that honor your clarity rather than punishing you for it. And slowly, carefully, learning to let the role go. Not the strength it built, just the story attached to it. The family needed you to be broken so they could avoid looking at themselves. Your continued growth is not revenge. It's not a performance for their benefit. It's simply what happens when someone stops accepting a role that was never theirs to carry in the first place. You were never the problem. You were the proof that a problem existed. And the fact that you're here, looking for understanding rather than just survival, tells me the fifth mechanism is already at work in you. You're not just surviving anymore. You're building. If this describes something you recognized in your own story, you might want to watch this one next. It goes deeper into what happens psychologically when someone who was silenced their whole life finally stops explaining themselves. I explore the psychology behind these patterns every week. If that's the kind of content that helps you make sense of things, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.